Hi, it's Michael Senoff with Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. The title of this interview is called Sales and Marketing Legend Ben Gay III Reveals to New HMA Marketing Consulting Students the Secrets of the Close. Ben Gay III is a marketing legend. When he was working alongside Zig Ziglar, Earl Nightingale, and Napoleon Hill way back when, Ben was the young guy. Now, he's the last living link to that era of marketing geniuses. And in this HMA exclusive interview, he shows new consultants powerful techniques they can use on every deal. According to Ben, the most important thing you need to remember when you go out there is that you're just as smart as 90% of the people who come through the door, if not more. You have a proven marketing system that works and scripts to use along the way. But he says in order to close, you've got to know what your last sentence is going to be before you start talking, and then naturally direct the conversation to that sentence. Ben also suggests that you start seeing people as new friends instead of prospects. Ben's had clients for 20, 30, and even 40 years because he considers each one a friend. And in this interview, you'll hear how to make those kind of relationships too, along with the exact sentence Ben uses to close on a new friend. You'll also hear the art of the referral fee and a quick story that illustrates why it's so important to either do it the right way or just forget it altogether. You'll hear the one person in your town you should always try to think about if you want to do cold calling the easiest and most efficient way possible. You'll hear the difference between sales coaching and marketing consulting and how to add the relatively new field of coaching to your consulting practice, along with 5 other income streams you may be able to add too. You'll hear Ben's polite way of turning a free call into a paying client by basically announcing, "Sorry, but the freebie is over." You'll hear how charging for his advice actually made Ben's life easier and more prosperous, and the no-nonsense way Ben gets paid for his time before he sends out the bill. You'll hear a trick for getting prospects to cold call you. You'll hear 3 ways you can project credibility without saying a word. You'll hear the little story of a man who built his thriving business of 40 years off referral generated from one cold call. You'll hear clear and straightforward advice for anyone worried about landing their first client. Believe it or not, you don't have to be some sort of overachiever to be successful in marketing. All you really need is a plan and a little know-how. Ben admits he's made C's in high school and couldn't make a sale for the first 6 months of his career, but he kept swinging at the ball with clear, obtainable goals in mind, and he's been knocking them out of the park ever since, 47 years later and counting. And in this audio interview, Ben shares it all with you. And if you stick around to the end of this audio, you'll hear a very generous offer Ben's giving to HardToFindSeminars.com listeners on his website at www.bfg3.com. Now let's get going. Hi, I'm Michael Senoff, founder and CEO of HardToFindSeminars.com. For the last 5 years, I've interviewed the world's best business and marketing minds. Along the way, I've created a successful publishing business all from home from my 2-car garage. When my first child was born, he was very sick, and it was then that I knew I had to have a business that I could operate from home. Now my challenge is to build the world's largest free resource for online downloadable MP3 audio business interviews. I knew I needed a site that contained strategies, solutions, and inside angles to help you live better, to save and make more money, to stay healthier, and to get more out of life. I've learned a lot in the last 5 years, and today I'm going to show you the skills you need to survive. The purpose of this call, then, is it's 2013, and I want to offer the existing HMA consultants and new HMA consultants who are coming into the program in 2013 additional advice from experts that I know from in the marketing world and additional encouragement, even though they already have so much of it currently in the HMA system. And I thought, what a great way to start off my new efforts in bringing new material to the HMA consultants with no one other than you. So I appreciate you taking the time to share with our consultants. So I'll start it off this way for the consultant. Who is Ben Gay III, and why should my HMA marketing consultants even consider listening to what you have to say?
I think the reason that perhaps I have something to offer is I'm pretty good at what I do, and length of service. I've been at what I do now in some form or other, parts of it anyway, for 47 years. I'm a young, as we record this, 70-year-old guy who grew up in the business with Zig Ziglar and Earl Nightingale and Dr. Napoleon Hill and so on, Bill Gove and Jim Rohn, etc. I could go on. But they were all considerably older than I was. I was the kid in the group. Therefore, I'm sort of the last living link to the giants in our sales and marketing industry. And I'm a good note taker. I paid a lot of attention. I wasn't the brightest person you ever met, but I surrounded myself with people who were.
What are your feelings about the consulting and the coaching business today?
Well, in general, not just mine, but in general, it's a booming, growing field, especially the coaching. Consulting's been with us forever. Coaching is a relatively new animal. Consultants dealt with big companies and so on. Coaches, by my definition anyway, when I say I'm consulting, it's usually with a company. When I'm coaching, it's one-on-one. That guy or lady may be the CEO or the so on, but they're more likely to be the owner, the vice president of sales, and or the people who work with him on a sales basis. Although I have people who just need a place they can go and talk to someone and know they won't hear it repeated anywhere. So I have some where I'm borderline psychologist without credentials. The problem that I find, consulting, you get found out pretty quick if you're not good because you're dealing with professionals. The coaching business, there are a lot of people who are now coaches, quote unquote, who've never done anything in their own life or spouting things they read in the manual somebody handed them. So there you got to be a little more careful. I know the people you work with, you train. I've seen the results of it. But a lot of people, you don't have to do anything in particular to become a coach other than go to your local print shop and order up some business cards. So I love the business. And I'll tell you quickly why I got in it. When Gigi and I first got together as a married couple almost 20 years ago, she noticed how much time I spent talking to people. Consulting I charged for, but coaching, if you called me, I was a sucker. And I love to talk, and I think I have something to offer, so I would offer and offer and offer. And she said, you know, do you think you could charge for that? And I said, I really don't know. And she said, why don't you try it? So I set a rate, still on it to this day. I ought to raise it, but I haven't gotten around to it. So I set up a little system, and here's what I found. The people who were just sucking off of me went away when they found out they had to pay. And that was good. 50% of my time that I'd spent in that endeavor was freed up, and the other 50% were happy to pay and put more value in it because something for nothing is worth nothing. And generally speaking, they realized I was doing something of value, and instead of having casual conversations that included the weather and the health of their dog, we get down to business quickly. I was talking to one of my coaching clients yesterday, coaching and writing clients, and we've known each other for years, but I was impressed and sort of amazed. I smiled when I said, hi, how are you, Carter? And he said, I'm fine. The reason I'm calling is, and we were off and running, and right at the end it was goodbye, and dial tones. That wasn't rude. It's just when they're paying, they want their money's worth and they want it fast. So I love both businesses, especially when it's via phone and email. I'm not a big fan of getting dressed and driving or flying somewhere to sit down and do the same thing, but I do that for a higher fee.
So you took something that you enjoyed doing, you like people and you like to talk, and you are giving away a lot of free advice, and you thought, well, hey, maybe since I'm giving this advice away anyway, maybe I can get paid for it. So can you take me through a transition of how you may be talking to someone, providing a little bit of advice, and then transitioning that person that you're talking to, who obviously may need some additional help with whatever it is, whether it's consulting or coaching, and how do you step-by-step turn that into a paying client, and then what do you charge for that service, and how do we close the deal? Take me through the process specifically so an HMA consultant can see what that looks like, a new one.
Well, I do a lot of open-ended stuff in social media and so on, and in my newsletters and in the Closers Update newsletter and in the Closers Alerts where I put announcements announcements about specific things that are open-ended that cause people to call and ask questions. I just got a couple of quick questions. Do you mind? I say I don't mind at all. It's what I do for a living, but sure, I'll answer a question or two for you. And I do. I'm a nice guy. As raised in the South, we tend to be polite people. And after it starts turning to a conversation, I just say, well, you know, what you might want to consider is our coaching program. And I generally don't explain it to them over the phone. I send them to the website, but I'll answer questions. The website lays out how I work. And how I work is, there wasn't any transition. I've just announced the free call is over. If you want to get serious, here's what we do. Telephone coaching is $200 an hour. $3.34 a minute. I don't do 15-minute minimums. If you call up and ask a quick question and it's a yes or no or whatever and we hang up, if I remember to make a note of it, sometimes I don't, I get criticized by that, but if I remember to make a note of it, you'll see a charge in your statement of $3.34. And if they don't call, I have one client who's had a $400 or $500 credit on his books for several years, and periodically he calls me and says, don't worry about it. I don't want a refund. I want you there in the background, ready when something comes up that I particularly need. The way they get started is they put up $450 to start with. Current rates, this is 2013. If you're listening to this in 2016, be sure and check with me. At some point I'm going to get around to raising my rates, but $200 an hour, $450 to start. 50 of that is you fill out a registration form, we get your file set up on the computer and in my rolling file that sits behind my desk. And then you have 2 hours of time. And when that time is gone, you get a bill at the end of the month. One of the things that I suspect you people would want to know is how do I get paid? If they want to pay by check off the statement, that's fine. But when you open an account, you put a credit card on file. And that's the way 90% of them get started in the beginning anyway. You put a credit card on file. So if you've gone through your 2 hours and you get an end-of-the-month statement, we'll get paid one way or the other. But we just don't have that problem because among the other things that I do, you know, I believe in sales infiltration. Most of the people, whether I ever met them in person or not, most of the people that I work with rather quickly become friends, sometimes in the first conversation. And friends generally don't cheat friends. I just haven't had that problem. I've had people with some financial difficulties, but you bear with those. I mean, we've all been through them, and so I just ride it out with them. As long as their intention is good and they stay in touch, we just don't have a problem.
Can you describe, and you touched on it briefly for the new consultants, what is your definition, the difference between the coaching and the consulting, and what advantages do you feel each possess in your existing business?
The differences in my mind are almost by my definition. I'm not reading out of a dictionary. Consulting to me is I'm working with a company through an individual or individuals, but I'm working with a company on a little bit broader thing. Yesterday, for instance, I was writing stuff for investment bankers and gradually going through everything they've ever put on paper and fixing it, not fixing it because they're very smart, but, you know, brightening it up, not making it sound quite so much like it came out of a computerized adding machine or something, putting a little personality into it. That's consulting. Coaching is, to me, a person calls me either at a preset time or spontaneously or whatever, and usually I work on preset times, and says, I've got a problem, or I want to talk about this, or help me when I get into this situation. And sometimes it goes all the way down to they're in a home or in a business selling something, and they hit a snag, and the call to their manager, you know, what drop call that everybody has in direct selling, didn't do it either. And they'll say, let me see if I can get my coach on the phone. Ben Gay is a world-renowned da-da-da-da-da-da, and they dial my number, and with a little luck, get right through to me, and I've closed many sales for people, either by telling the salesman what to do, and he's repeating it, he or she, or by talking directly to the customer. So the consultant might set up the National Football League and its structure. A coach gets down with the players. This is pretty good, Michael. I've never thought of this before. A coach gets down with the players and teaches them how to block and tackle and what to do in given situations. So that's sort of where I draw the line. Some people don't like to hear that they're being coached, so they call me their consultant. But in my mind, consulting is company, more serious, less immediate. Coaching is you and I are friends, and you got something you'd like a little outside advice with.
You're listening to an exclusive interview found on Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. Where do you think there's more financial opportunity in the consulting or the coaching business? Is the coaching limiting you because you're basically earning per hour?
No. The way I've set up my business, I made a few notes before we started this morning because I thought maybe you might ask me what's a normal day like. I get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then I have a list that I made of what time it is elsewhere that I have clients: Atlanta, Oslo, Norway, Hawaii, London, Hong Kong, Bangkok, etc. So it really doesn't make much difference to me. Picture 5 hats sitting on my desk, and the phone rings or an email or whatever, and it's a coaching client. I put on my coaching hat and go to work for whatever length of time we're going to spend. It could be a minute. I think the longest coaching call I ever had, I started just as I got in the car on the way to L.A. I had to hang up for a bathroom break and lunch and finished the call just as we pulled into L.A., which was about 8.5 hours later. And the shortest call I've ever had was I'd been working with a guy for some period of time, and I sort of knew the direction he was headed in, and he called me as I was walking into a hotel to do a seminar, and he said, "I think I'm ready to make the break and start my own company. Do you think I'm ready?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Thank you," and hung up. So they run from 1 minute to 8 hours. Therefore, they sort of fit into my schedule the way they fit in. One thing I've learned how to do, Michael, is I run my life and my schedule. People don't get to jerk me around. I turn on the phone at a certain time in the morning. I turn it off at a certain time at night, and everybody has to fit into those parameters. I've heard people say what they should do is carve out time here and there for your family. Well, what I did was I carved out or designed a life around my family, and I've carved out little niches to work in business. Now, the little niches total up to a lot of time. Starts at 6 a.m. in the morning, generally goes to 7 or 8 o'clock at night, even if I'm just writing by myself, and can run 7 days a week, although I get a little picky about weekends. So it's not either or to me. It's whoever's on the phone and what they need. Consulting has some advantages in that much of the time they don't know when I'm working or whatever. I keep a log and they get a statement at the end of the month. But I don't have to be on the phone or doing their work at 8:14 a.m. I do it when I want to do it. The writing I was doing yesterday for the investment bankers, I did throughout the day in the niches and corners of my day. I might spend 5 minutes on it. I might go back and just reread what I wrote and proofed it. I'm sure you run into this. I write things that are absolutely magnificent and look at them 24 hours later and wonder who the idiot was who wrote it. So I'm tweaking things constantly as they go out the door. I'm tweaking them right up to the last minute. So it really doesn't make any difference. This morning, I took a call right before you and I got on the phone. I probably shouldn't have because I might have had to cut somebody off. I only had 20 minutes before you and I were going to talk. But it was a gentleman calling from Las Vegas who wanted to order $6,000 worth of books and cassettes and so on. Or he started out wanting $3,000. By the time we got off the phone, the order was $6,000. Wrote that up. That's my salesman hat. Put it back down. Put on my telephone interview hat and called you.
One of the biggest concerns our new HMA consultants have is they're concerned about approaching a potential prospect or client, and they haven't had or gotten a client before. So they always ask, how is it that I can approach a client and have that credibility before I meet with them? What advice would you say to that new consultant who's pretty much just starting out, and how would they overcome that?
All the normal trappings, business cards, dressing well, or dressing appropriately. Sometimes that's not what I would consider well, but dressing appropriately to the situation. And then be more of a listener than a talker. Most of the solutions I've found in business and in selling and so on cross many different boundaries. When I go in to speak to a group, they go to, we're in the dental profession, or we're in home improvement, or we're in this, and so you got to know that because our people are different. Well, our people aren't different. They all do in business and sales about 95% of the same thing. So you know that the new guy, assuming he's been through your training and studied your material and so on, that new guy needs to know he's just as bright as 90% of the people or more that walk through that prospect's door. He's got a system to run on. And by that I mean he should have scripts. And I don't mean that you say exactly the same thing to everybody under every circumstance, but you have a plan in mind. I don't remember his name, but the other day I watched an interview with a gentleman who spent the last 30 years writing about Lyndon Johnson, a series of 5 books, and he's got one more to go, and he's in his 80s, and he's hoping he can get to the end of this one since the last one took 9 years. But the secret, the takeaway I got from that interview, because I've been doing it for years and didn't really know that it was something you should explain to somebody, in all selling situations, in all writing situations, whether I'm ghostwriting a book for somebody else or writing a book for myself or a sales script or what have you, I already know the last sentence, and I write to that last sentence. And he said that's what he does. In the book he's just starting, which he says will take 3, 4, 5 years to do, the last sentence is already written. He knows where he's going. Let me tell you a quick story. Now, you may have heard it before from me. I was fishing one day with my first business partner, James H. Rucker Jr., the greatest salesman who ever lived. And we were sport fishing down off Miami, and a big fish hit his line. And if you've ever been on one of those trips, all heck breaks loose. People are running around, the engine's going forward and backward, the captain's yelling to the first mate and everything. And I look over, and all this excitement, and Rucker's sitting there. He looks like he's in a trance. He was smoking a cigar. That's what you do when you're a young man on a fishing boat. Smoking a cigar, looking out at the water, and turning the reel from time to time and so on. But, I mean, just oblivious to all this pandemonium going on around him. And I looked over at him, and we're so close that he knew what I was thinking. And he says, Ben, the fish doesn't know how this comes out, but I do. And that calms me. So when I go in to talk to someone, I have a standard pity pat. I have a joke, my name, Ben Gay, got to get that out of the way. And we have an appointment set up if that's appropriate. Most of my work is done by phone, but we have an appointment set up. We both sort of know why we're there. And I say, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And I begin drawing a profile in my mind and taking notes of what he wants out of this relationship. I assume he wants something, or we wouldn't be talking. What he wants out of the relationship and whether I'm qualified to do it or not. I turned down a client yesterday who sent in some stuff that was so highly technical and mechanical. One, I didn't want to do it. It was giving me migraines. But really, I'm not their person. I'm their person to write a sales letter that goes on top of this pile of stuff that looks like a Sears catalog. And I can do that inexpensively as far as going through all of it. I just wasn't going to do it. So it's a weed in, weed out process for both of us. But the last sentence is already written, and that is, it's my standard close, although I've written hundreds of closes and books about closing and so on. I basically use one close, and it is after questioning and answering and listening based on what you've told me. Here's what I recommend. Now, before that, I've done the heavy lifting up front. They know who I am. I've established my credentials. They know I'm trustworthy. They know I'm a semi-nice, semi-funny guy, and I've gained their trust. So when I say, based on what you've told me, here's what I recommend, about 86% of the time, that's what they do, precisely what I told them to do. There may be a little dance. I got to go check with somebody or what have you, and I know all the closes and turnarounds for that, but I don't do much of them because I have worked hard to become a person of class, quality, and substance, one of the things I teach in seminars, and I have the ability to tastefully project that. And because I do, I probably have given a little more credence than your average bear.
Tell me what has been your number one selling publication book-wise to date.
The Closers Part 1, because that's the entry point. Once they get in, if they don't get the whole set to start with, which is what they ought to do, I'll give your listeners a real good offer on that before we're done. But the Closers Part 1 book is the common starting point for almost everybody that I work with, unless it was a referral, and I get a lot of those where somebody said to call and they didn't really know about the books and so on. And there I start them at least with that. It's sort of the entry gate to the world of Ben Gay.
For more exclusive interviews on business, marketing, advertising, and copywriting, go to Michael Senoff's hardtofindseminars.com. What is the Closers Part 1? What is that about?
Well, I didn't write the book originally. I found it, and I won't tie up time telling you the whole story, but I found it in horrible condition, both writing-wise, spelling, grammar, etc., and printing. When I flipped through my first copy, pages shot all over the room. So long story short, I got the rights to the book, rewrote it, and turned it into the bestseller of all time in selling. And the Closers Part 1 is the kicks, the blocks, and the punches of selling, the red raw meat. And it outsells the other material because, A, as I said, it's the starting point, and B, because that's what people like. I mean, it's like going to a NASCAR race. Anybody tells you they go to the race and weren't hoping to see a crash, hopefully with nobody hurt, is lying to you. That's among the reasons people go, and it's the number one psychological reason. A bunch of cars running around a tight circle doesn't really do much for most people. Well, the Closers Part 1 is that. It's exciting. People tell me, when I opened it, I felt like I shouldn't be reading it because it gives them an unfair advantage over other people. The Closers Part 2 picks up where it leaves off, and it shows you what sophisticated people really do with that information. Cary Grant said the secret of acting was not to get caught at it. It's also the secret of selling, and the Closers Part 2 shows you how to do that.
How important has the Closers Part 1 and Closers Part 2 been in positioning you as an expert, and what has it meant for all your consulting and coaching endeavors?
Well, again, because it's the starting point, the entry gate, it means a great deal. The whole Closers series, but the Closers Part 1, because that's where they find it. One of my biggest clients is in the home improvement business. He picked up his first copy for 50 cents at a garage sale, signed and endorsed to someone else. I wish he hadn't told me that. It sort of hurt my feelings. That's something I took the time to sign and endorse, wound up my garage sale for 50 cents. However, since then, he's bought thousands of copies and brought me in to do seminars on numerous occasions, and I do teletraining with their people and so on. So it's terribly important, but frankly, Michael, if it hadn't been that, it would have been something else. I was bound and determined to do what I do. I'm a good salesperson, and I'm a good person to teach people. I call us the C students. I made C's in high school, and if I'd stayed in college, I probably would have made some there too. On a good day, I made C's. And in selling, I think I've told you, I spent the first 6 months in selling where I could have made serious money and eventually did, the first 6 months without ever making a sale. And I wasn't willing to learn 50 tricky closes and 75 comebacks and all that. I wasn't bright enough, probably. So I had to figure out a way that the C students could make a living. 20% of the people I address in a sales convention will do just fine if I don't come. 20% aren't going to make it in selling no matter what I do. In fact, I advise them from the stage. I say, you know who you are. Managements begin to figure out who you are. You're in the wrong place. You know it. You don't like selling, or at least you don't like selling with this company. So when we break for lunch, you don't have to say goodbye to anybody. Just go back to the office, clean out your desk, and get on with your life. The people that I work with are the roughly 60% in the middle, those who could go either way. They're sitting on top of the fence. And with just a few techniques and insights as to what really causes a person to be an effective salesperson or sales and marketing person and so on, they can move into that top 20%.
You said something, and I don't want to gloss over it, and the listeners should rewind if they didn't hear you say this, but you said your one best client you've been with over 20 years. So a new consultant coming in may have not even considered that he could actually have a client for the next 20 years. What would you say to that new consultant about what it means to have a client for over 20 years?
I have some longer than that. In fact, usually I have some 30 and 40 years, but when they get in that 40 category, they retire and or die. So I've lost some that way. But most of my clients, the Economic Times got the business or something, or they died. Because in the client relationship, and we covered that, I answered the question earlier on a different subject. I write the last sentence in the book when I start. When I start talking to somebody on the phone, I'm busy making a new friend, and we're going to be friends for the next probably 20 years. I say 20 because I'm going to retire at some point. I don't know when, but I'm going to retire at some point. And all of my relationships, since I got smart, are based that way. I was fast and loose with some relationships in the early days, and I regret it to this day. I patched most of them back up. But some are gone forever, friends and clients and or clients. But when you start out, it's supposed to be a long-term relationship, one-on-one with your client and referrals from that client. We tell the story in one of the books. I think it's Closers Part 2, but forgive me, I've written a lot of stuff. I forget where I put stuff. A gentleman I know went to a J. Douglas Edwards training seminar. Doug Edwards was one of my mentors. I wrote his book for him from his stuff after he died and still sell it to this day after 30 years of not selling it. But this guy went to a Doug Edwards seminar and heard that with referrals, you should get at least 5 referrals, 10 referrals from everybody you call on, and then you call on them and you get 5 referrals and so on and so on and so on. And he said, as he was retiring, he said, Ben, I was so stupid I believed that. In a 40-plus year-long career of selling china, glassware, gifts, etc., in-home, things to give at weddings and to have on your shelves and so on, in a 40-plus year, he told me, I made one cold call. The first one I ever made, and everything since then for 40 years has been a direct result, generations later, of that one call. So when you say hello to somebody, you're starting a relationship that should last as long as both of you are still working in a field that corresponds, and hopefully you'll both be friends anyway, and you should look at that person as a source of referrals, which come naturally and easily if you're doing a good job. If I wanted more opportunities to write stuff in investment banking, all I have to do is say to my client who got my stuff yesterday and wrote back, "Absolutely beautiful, Ben. You took my bland business writing and turned it into something exciting, and I'm so excited. Send me more stuff next week." Well, that'd be a great time to say, "Carter, who else do you know in the business who needs the type of thing I do?" And I guarantee you I'd get referrals. Mainly, though, and more important, it tells him that I'm looking for referrals. So he might give me one or two the day I ask him, but he'll give me 30 or 40 over the next 20 years.
That ties perfectly into my next question. I get a lot of concern from new prospective people considering getting into the HMA marketing consulting business. And one of the most common questions I have is, how many consultants do you have in my city or in my town? Now, the website for becoming an HMA consultant is called My First HMA Client. And so we focus a little bit on how to get that first client. And for someone who's a little green and maybe not as experienced, getting that first client can be pretty tough. So what would you say to that guy who's worried about other consultants in his city? Is there plenty of opportunity in business today still as a marketing consultant?
I live in a little town of Placerville, California, where gold was discovered, and I don't take local clients, so I may not be the best example of that. But if I were going to be a consultant in and around Placerville, I would have zero concern about the other people around, because my relationship is one-on-one. I was in the cosmetic business for years, and people used to talk, because we were in multi-level marketing. People say, "Well, when are we going to reach saturation?" Well, because most people don't do what they're supposed to do, the answer is never. And the other answer is, when you're the one standing on the doorstep with your box of samples, you're the only cosmetic person in the world. When you're the consultant talking to someone in a big town or a small town, I was raised in Atlanta. I could spend the rest of my life in Atlanta and never get more than a mile off of the Beltway, the perimeter road.
285.
Yeah, just go around it and around it and around it, and off on the little spurs and into the middle where all the interstates come together, and you'd wear yourself out. You probably wouldn't bump into two other business consultants in your career. And with the rate of, most small American businesses, 95% of them are out of business within 5 years. Elmer Wheeler said, "Find a need and fill it." Well, there's a need that needs filling. People are desperate to improve the business they have and or just stay in business. If you'd like a tour of Main Street, Placerville, I'll be happy to take you down. And about a third of the shops and businesses and so on, and out in the warehouse and light industrial areas, it's the same. About a third of them are empty. The economy was a factor, but two-thirds of them survived. What's their secret? Not having the right answers, the right consultant is what did them in. So it's zero concern. And you said they're afraid of getting that first client. Well, that's internal. The first client doesn't have to know he's the first client. So that's you crawling out from behind your couch, mustering the courage to go make that first call. And then they get easier and easier and easier. And then as soon as you have a little victory somewhere, they get tremendously easy. You'll have ups and downs, and you'll go through slumps. Sometimes it's just random chance. We had a time, Michael, I'm guessing 10 years ago, where the phone did not ring, literally did not ring for 11 days. To the point I was picking up the phone to make sure there was a dial tone.
I know about those days.
Yeah, something's wrong here. Well, it turned out by the end of the month, sales were up over the previous month and over the same month a year before. The averages caught up with us. Sometimes that just happens. There was nothing wrong. Maybe there was some storm somewhere that I didn't put enough stock in. But you have good days and bad days. Today's been a great day. I've answered the phone personally 3 or 4 times. Everyone was in order. They have totaled quite a bit of money. Yesterday was a great day. I finished 2 writing projects, got paid for them, did some ghost writing in the middle, got another book that's about to go to the publisher. And so what you just do is you keep swinging at the ball. Make sure you're getting your swing right, but you keep swinging at the ball. I do pretty much the same thing every day. The only difference is clients don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, so sometimes they take me off track, but they do it, and we make money together.
You're listening to an interview on Michael Senoff's Hard to Find Seminars Entrepreneurship.com. What's your feeling about swinging on the phone, calling and using the phone to do cold calling to generate prospects if a consultant doesn't have referrals at the beginning of his business or a warm center of influence in maybe a city or town? He's kind of starting out cold.
Yeah, he should have those. Develop quickly a center of influence, a warm center of influence, and then develop a non-threatening script that gets you through the gatekeeper, or at least gets a call back, and you work emails, and I do a newsletter that generates calls, and I may not be the best person to ask this because one of the joys of being in the business 47 years is I don't really make many cold calls. In fact, when somebody gives me a referral, call so-and-so, he'd love to have you, I say, well, you tell him to call me. So I do things to make them call me, in other words, because when people call in, the psychological advantage shifts. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I sit here grinding out cold calls. I don't. And frankly, never have. I've always been good about getting people coming at me, going back in the early days when I didn't know what I was doing, and now when it's a deliberate scheme, I get people to come at me. But if I'm starting from ground zero, you look around your market area, find that warm center of influence. It might be somebody who's a big deal in some of the local clubs. He or she doesn't need you, but they know people who do. There's a gentleman right here in our town, Steve Shortis. Wonderful guy. We've never done any business together. Well, that's not true. He handles some of my insurance. But we really haven't done anything together. But he serves on the board of directors of like 15, the Boys and Girls Club, the hospice, the this, the that, and so on, more workshop and for rehabilitative enterprises, I think it stands for. But he's one of the neatest people I've ever met, and he knows everybody that's anybody. So if I were starting out fresh in Placerville and I was going to make cold calls, I'll tell you right now, I'd call Steve Shortis. Say, Steve, here's what I'm doing. Who do you know? And, of course, you have to have had a good relationship with Steve. That's, again, become a person of class, quality, and substance. So he feels comfortable in referring you to people. But I'd call Steve. That'd be my starting point. I have 5 others I could name off the top of my head. But Steve would probably be the best one. And if I get into him, I have at least a foot in the door with, I'm guessing, 40 other important people in El Dorado County, California.
Do you ever offer, financial incentives to get things going? Like if you mentioned Steve, for anyone you refer me, I can give you 10% of a project or anything like that. Does that help? What's your feeling?
What I pay is a 20% referral fee, and people of Steve's quality wouldn't raise their finger. It might even hurt the relationship to offer them 20%. But what I do is, when I get the business, I just send them a check. The first time, most of them don't know it's coming. And if I did, and I did years ago with him, where he didn't know what it was, I'd say, well, Steve, that's a referral fee I pay, 20%. Any service business, speaking, writing, consulting, coaching that you send me, and I'm happy to do it. And he said, well, I didn't do it for money. I said, I know you didn't. We never discussed it. But that's what I pay. Steve and I never had this conversation, but if there's any resistance then with Steve, I would say, Steve, you're on the board of directors of every nonprofit, wonderful organization, foundation, club in this county. Endorse it and hand it to one of them. I don't care what you do with it, but I have it budgeted. Now, there's other people, seminar promoters, who that's what they do, just for me, either on a 20% referral fee when they go get a speaking engagement for me with some company and they just have to bring me in or set the deal up. They get 20% of my $9,500 fee, or they buy their own date, go out and sell tickets, pay me $9,500 and put the rest of it in their pocket. Most recently, of a magnitude in that area, was a gentleman who put 2,000 people in the Orlando Convention Center at about $100 a head. He grossed $200,000. Paid me $9,500, paid $2,000 for the room. The rest of it, obviously, he had expenses. He had to eat lunch and stuff, but the rest of it went in his pocket. And as long as it's done tastefully, it's not, hey, go out and lie for me and get me business and I'll give you a fee. It pays off. We have people who do that with us, and it just makes you aware. When I'm listening to a real estate story or somebody wants to list their home or whatever, we have people who have been kind to us in the past because Gigi and I she especially is well known in town. I'm not, because I don't take local clients, so I'm known as Ben Gay, and we don't know what he does. He's Gigi Ronzoni's husband, which is exactly the profile I like. But Gigi knows everybody that's anybody, and people ask her, she used to be in real estate, who should I get? Who should I do? And we're influenced by the fact that some people do serious things for us. And I would say do serious things for them or don't do anything. She gave a referral for a friend of hers one time that wound up listing 2 houses and selling both of them. And a few weeks later, we got a little $5 batch of chocolate candy wrapped in tinfoil on our front steps. And that was insulting. If she hadn't given us anything, I never would have thought about it. We didn't expect anything. But if she'd given us, I'm guessing her fees out of that were $20,000 or so. It was two pretty nice pieces of property. If she'd given us $1,000, we'd have put up token resistance. She would have said, do what you want to do with it. I'm giving it to you. We'd have cashed it and put it in the bank. And we'd be looking for opportunities to help her. I got all the chocolate I need, so she's a nice person, but I'm not knocking myself out for her.
Talk to that new consultant who's considering getting into the consulting business. You've been in it 40 or 50 years, so the new guy couldn't possibly know all the different ways he can generate income. So maybe give some examples of some different ways that Ben Gay III earns money, all because of his consulting and coaching business.
Well, a big part of it is simply brainstorming, sitting around. I have the advantage of seeing many different businesses. I knew the recession was coming long before most big chief economists probably knew, but I have my hand on the pulse. I knew the recession was coming long before it was mentioned on the news or anything else because I could feel the pulse of my clients slowing down a bit. So you have the overview advantage, which you then bring to the table by, I understand the situations you're facing. I have clients all across the country facing similar ones. Let me tell you some of the things that we're doing with them to offset this situation and to move forward in this situation and so on. I'm working with dentists right now, a company that does seminars for dentists on how to build their practices. Well, our training starts at the person who answers the phone and the receptionist because they can destroy your business. So if you're a consultant, coach, that's one of the places to start right there. And then you work your way through the organization because everybody, whether they're a dental hygienist or a rain gutter installer, everybody affects your business. And you just start looking for those things. I look at most businesses as if I were a customer. And what would slow me down, speed me up, and so on. I made a small contribution to a book called Waymish, W-A-Y-M-I-S-H, that a friend of mine wrote years ago and then passed away, and his son recently rewrote, and I've made some contributions to that. Waymish stands for, why are you making it so hard for me to give you my money? And it happens all the time wherever you go. Occasionally you experience just wonderful service, but most of the time you don't. There's a value you can bring to companies. Let's say it was a retail business. Go in and shop the store first. See how you were treated. See how long it took to be acknowledged. Every little thing. And then, 6 months later, you might be into their shipping costs and better ways to do that. But find an easy toehold, an easy, non-threatening way to get your foot in the door and let them see what a neat person you are and how valuable you are.
Okay, so the question I wanted you to elaborate on is how does Ben Gay III make his income because he chose to kind of get into the consulting and coaching business? So one way is coaching with clients over the phone. Another way is consulting work with clients where you're working in their business and you're charging fees for that. You also, if I'm correct, you are a speaker. You do a lot of speaking?
Yeah. I made a little list when I thought you might ask me that. Let me just run through it. Somebody says, what do you do in an average day, which is what caused me to look up the time zones. I don't have an average day. London is 8 hours ahead of us. Hawaii's 2 hours behind. Oslo, Norway's 15 hours ahead and so on. And in Hong Kong and Bangkok, it's been tomorrow for quite some time today. A lot of it is customer driven. But in result, here's what I do. I sell my material, books, CDs, DVDs, etc. And your listeners can go to www.bfg3.com. That's www.B as in Ben, F as in Frank, G as in Gay, the number 3.com. And look through the material that we offer. All of it comes with an unconditional lifetime money-back guarantee, and it's the best there is in the business. I've spent a lot of years making sure that it is. So I sell my material. Then I sell my services, as we've been discussing, coaching and consulting, etc. Then I sell for my clients on a fee-based or commission basis, either difficult clients or testing new concepts, whether we're selling land in Arizona or hearing aids in Oregon or home improvement up and down the East Coast and in Texas and Louisiana, lots of different places. I'll phone people to test my material and get a commission on what I sell, or I have a financial interest sometimes in what I sell. Then I do writing projects. I write sales letters. The thing that goes on top of all that literature, but the literature doesn't mean anything if there's not a salesperson there, and in this case, the salesperson is a sales letter. I write sales scripts, so as we were talking about earlier, when someone goes in to call on somebody, they should have an idea of what they're going to say. Hal Holbrook does Mark Twain. He's memorized 8 hours of Mark Twain material verbatim. His show runs 2 hours. So what he does is he uses one standard story every time to test the temperature of the audience. I use, let's get this Ben Gay thing out of the way, and if they roar, I'm in. If there's mild chuckling, then I've got some work to do. But you start there, and you work your way through using what Hal Holbrook, based on the reaction to that first story, reaches into his catalog of the other 8 hours of material and starts pulling stuff out. He claims he's never given the exact same performance 2 times ever because he has so much material and pulls it out in different order, different situations, and so on. Then I do sales and marketing materials, spiffing up the catalog. I'm not a designer, but most people already have their clumsy attempt at a catalog or whatever, and I work on that with them and then make sure there's a sales letter on top of it. I do ghostwriting. I've written 12 books under my name, and I'm thinking 12 or more books for other people under other people's names. Only been caught once by one person. He recognized my writing style, so I had to drop some of the little characteristics I use when I'm writing for myself. In my introduction, it says, it's been said if you're in professional selling, you have at least one Ben Gay book in your library, whether you know it or not. And then I do telephone and video monitoring of sales meetings and teleconferences. For instance, on the East Coast, I have a dear friend and client where I'm linked into all of his sales meeting rooms by video. And I sit here, usually in my bathrobe, because it's 6 o'clock in the morning when he starts, my time, 9 his time, in all of his East Coast offices, and I watch what's going on, and I give aid and comfort and guidance to his sales managers in the 10 different offices, show them what they did right, show them what they did wrong, and give them lots of positive reinforcement when they do something right. And I sort of serve the purpose of being a conscience. As soon as they learned, that little camera over in the corner had Ben Gay behind it watching the meeting shapes up. And then, of course, I do coaching and consulting, as we've discussed. And I probably miss some things that I do, but, again, I'm customer-driven. If I know how to do it and you want it done, you call me. I have a magic Rolodex on my desk, not on a computer. One of those old-fashioned Rolodexes is 4 units wide now. And I tell people, you call me with any question you have, and I either know the answer or within 2 phone calls, I'll have the answer for you because I know the guy who ought to know, and if I'm wrong in guessing that, he knows that number or she knows that number. So I'm a resource there, and I'm generous in working with people. The smarter ones, when I send a business, give me a referral fee, but I never ask for it. On the other hand, if I don't get it, I might look at my Rolodex a little differently next time. So I'm a kind and generous guy. However, this is a business, not a charity.
For more exclusive interviews on business, marketing, advertising, and copywriting, go to Michael Senoff's hardtofindseminars.com. What do you enjoy most about what you do?
Speaking, Michael Jackson said years ago that he wished, I'm not quite as deranged as he was, he wished that when the show was over, the spotlight would come down to a little pin light on the stage, and he would shrink with it, and he would virtually disappear on the stage, and he would stay there till the spotlight came back on again, and he would grow back into the expanding spotlight and be Michael Jackson, the performer, again. Of all the things I do, there is nothing I like better. And people find it weird, they're about to be introduced and they're out in the lobby sweating or whatever. I'm in the back. Let me in, coach. Let me in, coach. Read the introduction faster. Let me at them. Because I'm good at what I do and I share a lot of valuable information. I have literally saved thousands of careers from the stage over the years. And a few lives, I was later told, of people who were at their wits' end and their rope's end. And one gentleman who came to a seminar I did in San Francisco said, on the way over here, I decided I would listen to you and gain what you had to give me. And if it wasn't enough, on the way back, I was going to jump off the bridge. And he was telling me that as the president of a very successful company years after it happened.
What are your feelings about doing contingency consulting work? A consultant may approach someone and the business owner says, yeah, we'd love to have you. Why don't we work a deal? You work for me and perform your magic and I'll pay you a percentage of the growth that you get me. Any feedback on that type of arrangement?
I hope I'm not going against things that you teach people because you're a genius at what you do, and I'm always reluctant to conflict with someone. But if they want to do that above and beyond my $200 an hour, I'd love to do it with them, and we're open to things. But I don't work on the come anymore. I don't work for stock after they go public. You know, if all the companies I did that for in the early days had gone public and survived, I'd be a billionaire. So I'm a thank you very much, but I want to get paid guy, and if that means I lose some on the back end, so what? Now, I have friends, one that you and I both know, David Garfinkel, who charges, I shouldn't quote his rates, but one figure I remember stuck in my mind was $25,000 for a letter and 5% of sales. Well, the $25,000 per letter, I got that, and 5% of sales is a bonus, but I wouldn't do it for 10% of sales or 20% of sales and no front-end money at all, ever.
So this probably answers the question I had written down. How do you make sure you get paid? You make sure you get paid before you give the goods.
Right. They pay a small retainer in advance. Now, if it's a big project, the retainer is not $450 because I'm going to spend that the first day, and they know it and I know it. So we work out a retainer that makes them feel comfortable. Recently, it was $8,000, but I'm still charging them at $200 an hour. I just know what I was going to spend on even the first few things I was going to do for him. So we agreed on $8,000. He felt comfortable, I felt comfortable, and we're off and running. But his credit card's on file. So I get paid up front. It's just like giving a seminar, Michael. I still operate off of a calendar. I mean, I have a book, looks like a hymnal from some company. I get it from every year. If you and I talk about a seminar, I will write it in pencil on the appropriate date. For $500, I write it in pen. The $500 is non-refundable, but it is transferable if something comes up. Then before I get there, technically the rest of it is due in 30 days before the event, but I'm an easygoing guy, so sometimes if they're having trouble on their end and they admit it, they're open with me, 50% total, they already paid $500, 50% total 30 days before the event, and then the rest of it before I get on the plane. And I've cut that so close that on one time on the way to the East Coast, I said, all right, I'll drive to the airport, but I'm stopping by FedEx. If the check's not there, I'm going back home. And we stopped, and it was there. Cashier's check for the remaining balance, and I already had the plane ticket, so we got on the plane, went and had a big successful day. I was the first speaker, to my knowledge, in the country back when Zig and I and Earl Nightingale and everybody, Earl was already established, Zig and I sort of started together. But they used to spend half their time, as did I, chasing the program chairman around trying to get the check, which is humiliating, affects your attitude, especially if you haven't gone on yet. And the program chairman always had an excuse and so on, and, well, don't worry, we'll mail it to you. I forgot to bring it and so on. So I just removed that from my life by paying in advance. And everybody, when I first did it, said, you're crazy. Nobody will ever do that. Now all speakers with a brain do it. And most consultants protect themselves on the backside. I don't have, with the exception of maybe two people, and their names don't even come to mind, but I think I have two folders where they owe me a little money, but they hit a financial rough spot. They told me they did. You know, they paid the previous month, but that last month had some unpaid stuff in it. But they will come around. I've discovered you meet people on the way up and you meet them on the way down, me and them. We all go different ways on the ladder at different times, and I don't burn any bridges. I'm a very forgiving person, but I don't forget. If you screw me, we may do business in the future, but we'll do it under a little tighter terms. And while you're talking to me, I'll have to remember, oh, he lies. I have a friend, an acquaintance, but I treat him like a friend, and they joke about him as the old joke. How can you tell when he's lying? His lips are moving. So you work with somebody like that differently, if at all. But I've sort of taken forever and never and things like that out of my vocabulary, but I make sure I get paid.
Can you give the listeners the URL of your website again? And I think we discussed maybe you have a little special incentive or a special offer for our HMA consultants.
If you go to www.bfg3.com, as soon as you get there, a little drop box will come down. Be sure and fill it in, name and address. I don't need your physical address. We don't mail much anymore except for products that you bought, so just fill that in. And you'll get free, no involvement, no cost, no obligation, copies of the newsletter from time to time. You don't get a full subscription, but when I see something that ought to go to everybody, you'll get those and some various things, all for free, and just so we can sort of stay in touch. So fill that drop box in no matter what you do. Then click on products. And you might click on coaching, too, because it'll explain more of what we've been talking about today, but click on products. And you can get anything you want. You can buy any individual thing you want out of the Closer series. But what I recommend you do is you get the Closer's executive package, the professional level executive package. I'm quoting from memory. I don't have a price sheet in front of me. If purchased separately, everything in that package comes to $1,700 or $1,800. You get it for just $595. It's close to a 70% discount, as best I recall. And then what you and I were talking about the other day, and it all comes with an unconditional lifetime, no questions asked, money-back guarantee, but you'll never send it back. We haven't had a return in 5 years, I don't think. So you get all that along with sort of a lesson plan. I'll tell you how to go through it. And then what you and I were talking about the other day, it's already deeply discounted, but if I know they're from you, down in the comments section, on their order, if they place it, tell them to say the Hard to Find Seminars or Michael Senoff, or give me a clue that it's from you, and we will also include in the box a free copy of Sales Closing Power. That's the book I wrote for Doug Edwards from his seminar material. I'm not saying I created out of thin air after he died. His family asked me to do the book, so I did. Been out of print for about 30 years. We literally found a supply that was in the wrong place in the warehouse for 30 years. So they're brand new books, but they were done 25, 30 years ago, and they're selling on eBay for up to $300. We sell it if you just want to buy it for $35. I'll put it in the package for free. And then I also alluded to Wamish. Why are you making it so hard for me to give you your money? I have a small section in there, but the whole book is great. It gives wonderful examples, especially for people in the consulting business, of horrible service, great service, big companies, little companies, places you've never heard of. The two examples I put in there, one extremely good, Rite Aid, with one person they have, and one extremely bad with McDonald's. And in both cases, I give the store numbers. In one case, the employee's name, the good one. In the other case, their title, manager at McDonald's, and why I will do business forever with one and never with the other one, and how that applies to businesses everywhere. One person can make or break your business. My client in Atlanta used to tell me, I have 300 people working for me between office and salespeople out in the field, and I said, no, you have one. He said, what do you mean I have one? I said, you have the one person who's talking to your client. That's the only person they know from your company. That's how they'll learn everything they'll ever know about your company, et cetera. And that's where we got to get our training down to every single person understands they're on the team. I don't care what part of the business they work in. They're a salesperson. They're fronting the company for us. And Wamish is filled, I've never counted them, but I'm guessing hundreds of examples, both good and bad, of that. And I'll put that in the package for free, too.
That's a generous offer, and I'd recommend any of the consultants listening to this, or anyone listening to this interview with Ben Gay III, should jump on that offer, especially with the lifetime money-back guarantee. We're about out of time. I want you to part with some heartfelt advice for that new, green, young person who's considering getting into the marketing, consulting, and coaching business. What last parting words of advice would you give to them?
A, do it. If you do what you're supposed to do and do what Michael tells you, it will be extremely rewarding, fulfilling, enables you to pick your own hours and your own lifestyle, and in time go where you want to go, when you want to do it, and in style if you choose to do it that way. I wholeheartedly encourage you to do it. Follow the training material that you received from Michael, and don't second guess him. Don't reinvent the wheel. Do it. And then I'd go back to my old buddy Earl Nightingale and quote from The Strangest Secret. Roughly, I don't claim to have memorized the whole thing after all these years, but set a goal, a specific, measurable, attainable goal. If you want to make $1 million in the next 12 months, that's $2,739 a day. $2,800 is what I've rounded it off to just to keep it straight. So you have a goal right in front of you all the time. It's not for the year and you get to June and then you're not going to make it and so you lose heart the other half of the year. Every single day you have a specific goal of what you want to accomplish and make. And the next day when you get up, no matter what you did the day before, good, bad, or indifferent, set that same goal again. It'll all average out and go to work. And as Nightingale said, do your work, not just your work, but a little more for the lavishing sake, that little more that's worth all the rest.
Ben, it's been a pleasure. And for anyone listening to this interview who's enjoyed this, I have 2 additional interviews that I've done with Ben, and all you would have to do to find those is go to Google and type in Ben Gay III interview, and it should come up on top, and it's located at Hard to Find Seminars, and this will give you a much more in-depth history, fascinating story on Ben's career. So I thank everyone for listening, and Ben, I thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to getting my version of that book. You got it in the mail to me?
It's in the mail.
Oh, I can't wait, and I appreciate it.
And I'll tell you the inscription. It says, Michael, make Doug proud of you. I already am.
Oh, I appreciate that. I love it. Well, thank you very much again, Ben, for your time, and I will send you the final edited version with the description, and you're more than welcome to share it with whoever you want. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
That's the end of our interview. I hope you found this educational and entertaining. And for more information on the HMA Marketing Consulting System, go to www.myfirsthmaclient.com. That's www.myfirsthmaclient.com. Thanks for listening.